Well, here we are.
Here we are.
Thanks for being a part of it. And I was thinking about our podcast today, and I was talking to one of my friends about it. He said, that sounds really cool. And I told him, it is. It is very cool. And the idea of After Sunday is something that I'm really passionate about, because I think I said this on our first episode. If you are a hearer of the word, James told us this, and not a doer of the word, then you deceive yourself.
Right.
And as a pastor, I guess that's one of my greatest concerns, is that I could set someone up for self-deception if I don't communicate in a way that makes them feel empowered to be a doer of the word and not just a hearer of the word. And so Rachel and Rahdona, thanks so much for taking a minute and talking tonight about what we talked about yesterday. And that's kind of the intention and the purpose of After Sunday. And really, you know, a few minutes ago I was feeling like I was completely outnumbered, but maybe we can make it through this without y'all completely ganging up on me. But the reality is I've been really excited about incorporating both of you into our After Sunday podcast. So this will be fun. This will be a lot of cool information. And you know, of course, this past Sunday was Father's Day, and I spent the majority of my teaching and preaching time this past Sunday working around the theme of fatherhood and Father's Day in general. So there's a lot of that involved, and I think it could be an awesome perspective, really, for the two of you who are not fathers, but for the two of you to have insights and perspectives, frankly, that I don't have and could not have had as being daughters and as serving in the church in a very supportive role. The Scripture talks about being a helpmeet and being a supportive role to the doctrine and the principle of fatherhood as it is in the church. So anyway, I'm glad you're here.
Thanks.
That's cool. A couple of Maine girls.
Yeah,
oh my goodness.
That's right.
A couple of Maine girls.
Outnumbered again.
Oh my loving word. Let's not start the war all over again.
We won.
Yeah, that's right.
What did that say? One guy asked me one time, he's like, well, who won the war? I said, it ain't over in my house. We're still fighting it. I mean, you do whatever you want to do with it. Anyway, in Sunday Life, I took a text in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. I'll just reread it. Paul said, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And I took a few moments to emphasize, first of all, the commandment to not provoke a child to wrath is very direct in this text. And from a father perspective, it's very direct to fathers. Of course, a mom could provoke a child to wrath, but apparently God in his divine knowledge inspired Paul to address fathers directly because they had the greatest potential to provoke a child to wrath. In fact, Paul in another letter to another congregation said, don't provoke your children to anger lest they be discouraged. And I made the statement, the mark of a failing father is a discouraged child. And that's very convicting to me. So first thing we have is this commandment on what not to do, and then the commandment on what to do. There's a couple of things. Bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Of course, the nurture is the whole training and education of children and the shaping of their mind and their morals. So I made a statement too, their mentality and their morality is largely shaped by fathers and fatherhood, and as a dad, that's my responsibility. Also, we talked about the care of the body, and then also the admonition of the Lord is the exhortation and instruction that comes not only from fathers, but being coupled with the church. So, as I was preparing this lesson, I asked myself this question, how do my children, I took this very personally, how do my children experience and value the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, because it's not just something that I want them to experience. There's a lot of backslidden kids. I'll make it more personal. There's a lot of backslidden pastors' kids who experienced the admonition and the nurturing of the Lord. But I really wanted to know, how are they valuing that? Because again, this is my responsibility as their dad. And this is the responsibility of all the fathers, frankly, that call themselves the children of God or the sons of God. They are responsible for bringing their children up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And so I broke it down, and I asked my children very directly. I asked Jamin, I asked Rylan. As it turned out, the majority of what they gave me fits into the 5 love languages, which most people are familiar with, if not have read the book. I know you've read the book, babe. Have you read the book too?
Yeah, I have.
What do you think about the book?
I mean, I loved it. I think I have found it very helpful.
Yeah. Have you taken the test?
Mm-hmm.
So where do you score? What is like how you most
my top
yeah
quality time?
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that like yours practically? Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. So quality time's right up there at the top. And do you have like a second and a third? Do you remember?
Words of affirmation.
Words of affirmation. I could see that. Yeah. I could see that. And do you have a third?
And then third, very tied. Gosh, I haven't done it in so long.
Yeah.
Is what? Physical touch, and what am I missing? It's
acts of service.
Acts of service.
And what is it? Words of giving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch.
Yeah.
Is that all 5? I think it is.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So remind me on yours, babe. What yours is? I should know this, shouldn't I, Rachel?
You should.
Is oh goodness. This is going to turn into a marriage podcast, not about fatherhood. Quality time and what comes in second? Probably acts of service.
That would be
Yeah.
my
Acts of
guess.
service.
She really gets excited when I do
Yeah.
the laundry.
That would be my guess for her.
That's really it. Wow.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Do you feel like that love language thing, do you feel like that's true of how you relate to your father as well?
I think so. I can see that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in which you were teaching the kids Sunday Life class, but I made this statement further on down in the line that that while I was at the beginning of the lesson, I was talking about when we were doing the church remodel in Rogersville that I was astounded, but my dad, my grandfathers, both of them, and my father-in-law were all referenced by men who knew me and them. And one of the things that was said, Ed said, I was working with Ed on Saturday, and he said, that's exactly what Roger says. And I literally said, well, I think Rahdona married me because she sees so much of Roger in me. And he said, no, it's just because she felt sorry for you, which really hurt my feelings. I cried some. It could be true. But anyway, we're moving on. But that's an interesting thing because and that's one of the reasons why I was so passionate about having both of you on here. This is not just a lesson for men. This is a lesson about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And what are you doing with it? Is it causing you to recognize the good qualities of your relationship with your father, or maybe the absentee qualities of your relationship with your father? So anyway, I asked the kids some about that and ended up being involved with the 5 love languages. But I want to start with you, Rachel. Just talk to me a little bit about when I first went into this lesson. This is your moment to critique Pastor. I know you've been waiting for years.
Yeah, right.
Here it is. Don't pull your punches. Just let me have it. In the opening moments of this study, and as we began to look at the text and break down where we're going here, how was this striking you? What was like the impact? What were you thinking? Were you able to stay connected, even though again, this is really aimed at fathers? But were you able to stay connected? And what were your initial takeaways?
Yeah, it actually made me think more about my relationship with my dad. It's not, I mean, I'm sorry to say, like, not in a good or bad way, but it's not something you just think about all the time, especially, he lives in Maine, I live here, I'm there maybe twice a year. And you don't think about how that relationship affects you, or how growing up, how it affected you. And it's funny that you mentioned the love languages and how they can shape, or how they can be shaped by maybe your relationship with your father, or maybe not. But I had actually, it caused me to think about things that I got from my dad, or just certain ways that I am, I think, because of my relationship with my dad. And not even thinking about love languages, I wrote in my notes quality time, and just certain memories I have of quality time, of like family vacations. And he was kind of always, my mom did a lot of work in it too, but he was the one that always planned it, headed up, drove us, just kind of like your kids were saying, takes us on trips. I mean, that really made me think about my dad. And they weren't big trips, you know.
Right.
We didn't, you know, not millionaires, you know, but we would go to New Hampshire, and we would just go to like the lake for the day. And so thinking about that, I was like, that means a lot to me. And even still, when I go up home to visit, we usually will go to Home Depot because he wants to pick out plants and whatnot. And so, but that's like our time, you know. We get a Dunkin' iced coffee,
a crispy Dunkin',
yes, and you know, go to Lowe's or Home Depot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So even now, as an adult, it's really, you're realizing that quality time is how you experience the nurturing and the admonition that comes from your father. That's the most directly impactful way that you're getting that. That's interesting.
Yes.
That's very, very interesting.
And I never thought about that. And I'm sure it stems from lots of things, you know, but this really, it made me think more about my relationship with my dad, and in very good, positive ways too. So I was grateful for that.
Yeah. What about you? You listened to the lesson after the fact, babe. And so what were some of the first things that struck you? I mean, other than my dashingly good looks. I mean, I know.
Hold me back.
Moving on. What were the first things that struck you?
Well, actually, Brittany and I, while we were doing VBS today, we're kind of talking about the lesson, working on VBS props and stuff. And her and I were talking about the love language part, and that it's amazing how I never really thought about it, I guess, like talking about how your dad can help form that, but then like how Rylan and Jamin, their response to you really lined up with each other, and they didn't hear each other's responses.
Yeah.
And how like they covered all the 5 love languages, but as we grow, we kind of hone in on those like specific ones. But as a child, they're still developing and they're still growing, right, and learning. And
that's amazing.
They are experiencing all of those.
Yeah.
And as they grow, it hones into that specific top tier for them.
I hadn't thought of that. So are you saying, and I want to hear from both of you on this, are you saying that as a dad, we can't just get into a rut, I'll say it like that, of I'm going to hug my kids because it's right to hug my kids. You know, my kid might not need a hug.
Right.
They might need a gift, or they might not need a hug. In fact, I've known some kids that don't like hugs, but they may need a word. I'm proud of you type thing. So is that what you're saying, that especially in their development, we have to give them the experience? As a dad, I have to give them the experience of all, so that they can identify, and so that I can identify what impacts them the most?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's good.
A lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not about being bilingual. It's about being polylingual.
Right.
You have
That's
to.
Good.
And as a man, I'm like, well, man, I'm a physical touch kind of guy. So let's get the huggings going. I love hugging my kids. And my boy's like that. He jumps up, he runs. When I come in, he runs to me and hugs me.
Yeah.
When he came in here just a few minutes ago, he ran to me. I didn't hug him, but he just grabbed my hand for a second. He needs that.
Yeah.
That's kind of his deal. But Rylan's not exactly like that. But even still, they have to know that to not experience that is a limit. What would you say to that?
I was gonna say, I mean, you're your parents, you're shaping them, right?
Yeah.
So can't be shaped until they'll experience all the love languages coming from you.
That's amazing.
You can't just give them one or two and say that's it. It might not be.
Yeah.
You know, how do you know? How do you know unless you've experienced all of them?
Yeah. That's amazing. And I think Rylan is creating a sixth and a seventh because she mentioned cool cars and funny but mature at the same time.
I can get on board with the cool cars.
With the cool
I like
cars
that
thing?
one. Yeah.
That's kind of a thing. But I'm so glad she said that because I know now to watch out. If a guy pulls up in a Corvette, I'm just going to go slash the tires. That's what I'm going to do.
Let's go get a Ferrari.
Go get it. That's right. Thank you. I was looking forward to that. It's recorded. Let it be written in the law of the Medes and the Persians. You mentioned your dad, Rachel, and I think you're a fascinating person for a lot of reasons. Really, I do. But I don't want to know just about your experience with your father, but you've worked as a nanny for how many years?
October will be 16 years.
That's awesome. It really is, and it's a beautiful vocation. And when you tell me about your relationship with these children and you're singing them worship songs, I tell you, it's a ministry. It's beautiful. It's an awesome thing. And I talked about this the other night. One of your kids who you no longer nanny refers to our church, this place, this storefront, as a place to meet God.
Right.
Take me, Rachel, I want you to take me to God.
Right.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. But I wanted to ask you, I'm not asking you to break any HIPAA laws here, but I would like to know, you have been very close to multiple families.
Yeah.
And I'm certain, because you're an observant person, I'm certain you have observed different parenting techniques and styles and even qualities of father-child relationships. While we were studying the Word Sunday, was there any of that was triggered in your mind? And I'm not asking you to share details that should remain private.
Right.
But I was interested in that. I thought maybe you had something to share along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, very different parenting styles, parenting techniques. That's probably one of the most challenging things about nannying is everybody parents different. You kind of have to mirror that. But I mean, I've seen different fathers from very hands-off to extremely hands-on, some disciplinary, some not so disciplinary. But the hands-on, you see a very big difference in the child. I think so. Just in kind of how secure they feel, maybe.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having the dad role be a prominent role in their life. Because I have worked with families, and this is not shaming. This is not, every family is different, but some dads are on the road a lot. They're gone a lot, but they're, working, they're earning for their family. So that's important too. But you do see a difference there. So, and you had talked about the importance of balance, like sometimes sacrificing work, even though work is very important, it's a sacrifice to do that too. Like you said, like your dad would knock off early and spend time with you. So, there's definitely something about having that good balance there, but you do see a difference in the dads that are more present and more hands-on, more affectionate.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the differences are largely positive in the children?
When they're more hands-on,
when they're more hands-on.
Yes.
Break down hands-on. Give me examples.
So being present even with discipline, like it's not just the mom doling out all the discipline, which is kind of common, I feel like nowadays, which is interesting. That's not how I grew up.
That is interesting.
So, but that's what I see a lot. Dad's fun. Mom is, don't tell mom, we'll get in trouble.
Wow.
But when there's both, when there's teamwork, I feel like listening skills are better, which that's like that's such a child care term, but
No, I want to hear it.
Yeah, listening skills are better.
The child's listening
yes.
skills are better if the father is
Right.
present in discipline.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely positive all the way around. Like I said, I've just always noticed that like a more secure feeling coming from the
Yeah.
children. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And it made me think today, there's, I want to try and be careful here, but there's a server who, it's a place I go to lunch fairly often. And so she serves my table probably, I don't know, 1 out of 3 times that I go there. And I noticed she was down today, and I just said, "You doing okay?" And she said, "I'm just having trouble. My daughter's getting kicked out of the kids' camp, the day camp that I've got her with." And I said, "I'm sorry to hear that." And she said, "Yeah, she just doesn't listen." And I've come to understand that, again, this is not shaming. This is
Right.
not condemning. I understand circumstances happen,
Mm-hmm.
but this child is growing up absent of her father.
Yeah.
And it's astounding that you affirm that. Yeah, and my thing was, don't be too hard on her. I know,
Right.
and the mom starts talking about how she's going to discipline her. And she mentioned a couple of things, and in my mind, I thought, that's not a good idea. Don't do that. But I didn't say that. I probably should have. I probably just should have said it. I said, "Here's what you need to do. Bring that kid to me."
It's hard with other people's kids.
It really, spoken.
Right.
You probably know better than I. But that's amazing, because that's a temptation. I'll speak to you as a dad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a temptation to be the fun one,
Yeah.
and to let mom be the rule enforcer. But it's amazing that you emphasize this is a balance thing. It's not just a dad thing. Let's talk about the text. I looked at Luke 11, 9 through 13, where Jesus gave that dialogue, and it's an amazing thing what he said. He gives that text: ask, it'll be given; seek, you'll find; knock, it'll be opened unto you. And then he chose the relationship between a father and a son. I think that's right. A father and a son, to illustrate, that principle of God providing for us. And he talks about a son asking for bread, and the father giving him a stone. He talked about the son asking for an egg, and the father giving him a scorpion. And then he talked about the son asking for a fish, the father giving him a serpent instead. It's an incredibly powerful illustration that Jesus offered. And it was about that time that I made this point, and that was, you should, as a father, gift your children things that will inspire them to have faith in God.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, I don't know. I think gift giving in our culture has become almost looked down on, right? And maybe it's just because I like gifts. I don't know, but you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's the commercialization of relationships or whatever.
Right.
But really, gifts do have a place,
Right.
They really, and it's not. And I'm not talking about frivolous gifts,
Right.
And Jesus didn't talk about frivolous gifts. He talks about bread and fish and an egg. He's talking about life-sustaining
Right.
gifts, which in and of itself is pretty fascinating to think that Jesus referred to that as a gift.
Yeah.
Life-sustaining nourishment
Right.
is a gift. But it comes back to the point, gifts that we give our children as fathers should inspire them to have faith in God. What were your thoughts on that?
I actually wrote that down. The fatherly role you have in your children's life will largely shape how they view God.
Yeah.
And that struck me, so I did write it down. I can see that. I mean, I think it can shape just your ability to receive. And you had mentioned that how there could even be people that have a hard time receiving his spirit, right? Because we can feel unworthy, like it has to be earned and we can't earn it.
Right.
And so that is how gifts should be given from a father to their child, not feeling like I mean, allowance is one thing. Working, earning things, that's one thing, and that's a good
Sure.
lesson in itself. But like you said, there should be gifts that are given for no reason, just
Yeah.
out of love.
Yeah. That's and you caught that. Frankly, I'd forgotten that I'd said that. And it's not in my notes. I'm a bare bones kind of guy when it comes to my teaching. But it's a principle that was very intentional to me, and I've seen it. You and I have seen it. People struggling to receive the gift of the Holy Ghost, the gift of God's Spirit. We talked about, and we're gonna jump into worship service here in a minute and the message that I shared there. But the Spirit of adoption is the gift of the Holy Ghost. It's the Spirit of adoption, and people struggle to receive that because they feel like they have to earn it.
Yeah.
They feel like they don't deserve it.
Yeah.
And I'm this is coming together in my mind. It's inevitable. Every time I teach or preach, I'm like, oh my word.
Right.
I never knew that. I never saw that. And I'm discovering as I go along. I know people firsthand who have literally to this day been unable to receive that precious gift, and I'm coming to realize they had big problems with their relationship with their earthly father. I heard J.T. Pugh say that years ago, and this was the late 80s, early 90s when he was preaching that, literally 30 some odd years ago. He was ahead of his time in so many ways, but he had already drawn those connections, and he was ministering to a child out of a very abusive home, and that inability to receive that most precious gift, that gift of adoption, as a result of having a bad relationship with earthly father, with biological dad or whatever. That's an astounding thing. How do people get over that?
Prayer.
I don't think it's an instant thing.
It's not.
Time and the Word.
Right.
You got to work through it.
I think, and the more you read the Word and you know it's true and you believe it's true, the more you take it in, the more that's gonna cancel out anything that was put into you.
So God, I want to encapsulate this if I can. God has to prove Himself as a true, loving, everlasting, good Father against the bad experience you had with your earthly father. Is that what you're saying, Rachel? That
I think
time,
so.
that prayer,
Right.
that proving God.
Right. Sometimes things take time. Some things are instant. The Lord can do anything instantly, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
But some things do take time, and being in the Word and kind of having revelations as you go, as you study God's Word, and it just slowly builds.
Yeah. Maybe we could. I don't know your dad. I know your dad. I know my dad. I think we could probably all agree none of our dads were perfect.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
I had a
Right.
good dad.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Good
had
dad.
a good dad.
Yeah, but he wasn't perfect.
Right.
My dad wasn't perfect. Yours wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, even us having good dads, good childhoods overall, imperfect but good,
Right.
we still had to work through some of that, dismantle some of that, even on our own, to realize that we had a finite man shaping that father role in our life, and we have an infinite God
Right.
who is the everlasting Father. So we, as mortal people, have had to work through some of that ourselves.
Yeah.
And with me, I can say, I would do nothing to dishonor my father, but he would say he's imperfect. I would say I'm imperfect as a dad, and the hope is that I can inspire in my children enough godliness for them to seek out for their own selves and recognize, Dad was good. He was a good dad. But God is truly great as a father and an everlasting Father.
Right.
I think that's an astounding principle. We will, and I stand by that statement, we will shape as dads how our children view God. But as they grow and mature, their perspective of God will exceed just seeing them in dad, or it should.
Yeah.
It should do that.
Yeah.
That's an astounding thing. It's an astounding thing. So you mentioned a little bit about work. 1 Timothy 5:8. Paul said, any man that won't provide for his own, and especially those in his own house, has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I made the statement there's direct correlation between your work ethic and the integrity of your faith. I was speaking directly to the dads.
Yeah.
Directly to the dads. And I'll say this. I feel like podcasts should be a little bit controversial, so here we go. This is the controversial portion
All right.
of the podcast. There has been a very deliberate regression from the dad being the provider in the home in Western culture.
Yeah.
That's been very definite. Now, some of that is rooted in the "I am woman, hear me roar" movement.
Right.
Which is fine. There's been some roaring in my house probably a time or two. I got a couple of women in my house that roar.
That's godly roaring.
That's
it's okay.
Thank you, Rachel.
Magnificent. I want to say it's not the feminist movement that is the problem. I think it comes back to a maturity element and a work ethic and a faith integrity element in fathers. And I want both of you to speak to that. As women, it is so important that you speak to that and how you feel about that. Just very directly, this shift that we're seeing.
Yeah.
That let me illustrate it just a little bit more, and then I want to hear from you. I'm hearing in our culture this message coming to women and wives and mothers, even. You be sure and do something to take care of yourself because you can't count on that man.
Right.
That kind of message, and I want to know what you think about that, and as it relates to fathers in this text, this point, the incorporation of faith and work ethic. Just speak to that for a moment, and we'll start with you, Rachel.
I saw a quote, and I don't know who said it, so I don't know if I should say it or
It's
not.
okay. Go ahead and give it to us. We, in our first episode of this podcast, we set the precedent of unqualified quotes. So we're good with
and
it.
I thought it was interesting. It's not out of the Bible, so and I don't know if we need to edit it out, take it out, but I thought it was really good. And it was, weak men produce masculine women.
Wow.
And I thought that was a very powerful statement, and there was a lot of truth to it, because I feel like God made this perfect plan, right, for man and woman, and we've gotten so far from that. And when a man starts slacking in, kind of the duties, the jobs, the responsibility that is ordained by God, the woman then has to step up. And I'm not putting anyone at fault over the other, but the woman has to kind of rise up and take things in her own hands.
Yeah. And
I think that's kind of where society has gone wrong with that, is that, men are stepping out of their roles and women are stepping in and have this "we can do it all" mentality. And it's taking away from women's uniqueness and how God made women.
That's astounding.
And it is affecting parenting too, because, and I know this just, from several nanny positions where the woman rules and dad's an afterthought,
Wow.
And so I can see how in families that is definitely affecting, and definitely not for the good.
Yeah. I want you to go a little further. If you can, share how that impacts the children.
Well, I mean, respect goes out the window for dad.
Wow.
And I think dad gets kind of complacent with that role. I think as humans, we kind of do that. If we get put into a position, even if we don't like it, it's just how it is. It's just normal. And all the while not even thinking how that's affecting the kids. And it's affecting their whole viewpoint on marriage. And they're going to take that into adulthood.
Yeah. Your quote is not untrue, even though it's not a Bible verse. I think it's true. And the first the first Bible illustration I thought of when you gave that quote, which I agree with incidentally, is the illustration of Ahab and Jezebel. I've heard these men get up and gripe about the Jezebel spirit, and I've spoke on it myself, and it's a problem.
Right.
It's not just a problem in the Old Testament; it was illustrated in the New Testament. Yeah. But we have to bear in mind there never would have been a Jezebel if there hadn't been an Ahab, and Ahab was a very weak man. He was a weak man. He refused to, as Abraham did, command his house. And it's not about being a dictator. It's about being a leader.
Right.
And you're saying that the absence of that leadership, that commanding presence, and let's say that is rooted in service, is what has led to this movement where we are losing the, I think I want to get that exactly. The uniqueness, is that what you said?
Yeah.
The uniqueness of womanhood.
Right.
We are losing that.
Yeah.
And I'll make it very personal as fathers and their role of providing, being the provider for the families have declined. And again, Paul linked that to faith. He said, if you are not providing, you are an infidel. And I want to get it exactly right. He said, you have denied the faith. So same comment, same question, babe. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that feminism has played a role in that.
Yeah.
In ways, because now it's kind of biting them.
Yeah, right.
In the opposite way of now we have, men trying to not be men and take that woman identity, and the women don't like that. The ones that have been shouting, women this, women that.
Wow.
So now it's gone. The pendulum has swung too far.
Yes, went too far.
Yeah.
And how do you reverse that now?
Well, only the Word.
Right.
The Word and the Spirit is the only way it's going to do it. I think we have to be very careful as children of God to not allow these outside influences shape our homes.
Right. Definitely.
Subtly.
Yeah.
Subtly. I can speak for my home. I can tell you that if someone knocked on the door and looked at me, sat me and Rahdona down and looked at me and said, "You are no longer relevant. You will be subservient, and she will be dictator." I'd be like, "Nah."
No thanks.
Why did I even let you in here to begin with? But I can remember, I think it's in the book, The Marketing of Evil. But there was an illustration of how sitcoms are shaping families.
Yes.
And I don't mind calling it out. The Everybody Loves Raymond was the illustration. Yeah. And I've watched that show. I mean,
me too. Too much.
It's pretty funny. But if you read the book and then watch it carefully, you see
100%.
that every father figure in that show is touted as a bumbling fool, weak, just someone who's practically in the way,
get out of the way,
but cute if you need some comic relief occasionally.
Right. Yeah.
And when I read that
started years ago. That's
old.
old.
Yeah, that's like 96.
That's irrelevant. That's on
started.
TV land, right? I mean, that's that's not new stuff.
No.
And you think about what's happening. I don't even know what the new stuff is now, but you think about it. It's not a blatant message,
right?
It's a subtle message,
Yes.
and it's a joint attack. It's not just against fatherhood or motherhood individually. It's both. Right. I think as both of you with very apt perspectives have illustrated, it's very, very true. So I didn't get into all of that yesterday, did I?
No.
But that's triggering. I think that's part of the purpose here is to talk about the Word and to illustrate the Word and to expound upon it. And
it's just a clear target against families.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Right.
Bottom line.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I think I got around to the point I talked about as a man. I can tell you as a man, some days I don't want to go to work. I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
I look for ways to, good grief, let's trim the budget. Let's figure out a way where I can work less.
Yeah.
Some days, but every day, I can say this, every day I find a point. God gives this to men. God gives this to fathers. I find a point where I'm thankful that I'm able to do what I do, and there's the connection of the purpose for what I do and why I do is and it's that faith moment is what it is. This is not just a job. This is I'm not denying the faith. And I made this statement yesterday. I'm demonstrating my faith by my works, not just my words.
Right.
I'm demonstrating my faith by my actions, not just my intentions.
Yeah.
I think that's so important for fathers to grab.
Yeah.
And I talked about how my dad shaped my work ethic. So I want to ask y'all that. When you think about your work ethic, what did your dad play a role in how you view work and what you look for in a man as it relates to work? Did you feel that way? And Rachel, I'll bounce back to you here. I want to hear about that.
I mean, I would say so. I mean, my dad, a little backstory. My dad was a pastor till I was 13-ish, 13 or 14. But he also, just like you, I mean, he also worked another job. And that's something I really did not appreciate until I've seen you doing it and realize how much it is. It's a lot, and a family. And so looking back at that, I feel like as a child, maybe it got in there and I was, love you, Dad, but I was never like, oh, hardworking, kids. I feel like that goes over your head as a child, right? It's like things just show up. Food shows up. There's groceries. There's electricity, right?
Yeah.
But now I look back and it is very inspiring. All what he juggled, and happily, he did it joyfully. And I will say too that since coming back to the Lord, living for the Lord, for a few years now, I feel like my work ethic really, not that it was ever bad. Well, I've been a pretty good worker, but but it has improved even more so because like you said, because we're always working like for the kingdom, right? Even in our secular jobs, and that stays with me. I mean, you said it one time and it stuck with me.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Maybe you could speak to that too. Just the what was the impact that you had? And again, I'm kind of like you. I don't know that I ever paused and thanked Dad but Rylan did. That was Rylan's first thing. I said, "What makes a dad a good dad?" And she said, "Works." That was and it drove me to this text, and it's acts of service when we talk about the 5 love languages. But maybe you could speak to that same thing.
My dad was just an amazing provider and always doing.
Yeah.
And not just for our family, but doing for everybody else.
Yeah.
And you say that, he'd give a shirt off his back to somebody else. But like literally he would do that. And we have this funny nickname that we've given him over the years.
Maybe I'm sitting here thinking
and exactly. Mr. Salvation Army.
Mr. Salvation Army.
Because he just gives and gives and
He's
gives
still
and
that
gives.
way. I know him as that way.
Yeah. And that's just like, it just oozes out of him. So that's what I observed my entire life is just
he set the bar.
give. And he has this saying like, how much can you stand to be blessed?
Yeah.
Right.
How much can you afford to be blessed?
How much can you afford to be blessed?
Yeah.
That's good.
So just giving.
And so that's, you're looking at, for you it was a bivocation.
Yeah.
And for you it was a giving spirit that splashed out of the local house, out of the local family, beyond the wife and children into the lives. It's amazing. I want to touch this real quick, and then I want to talk a little bit about the Sunday worship service and that message here. Something that really impacted me while I was studying and even delivering this lesson was it's impossible to make up for time not spent with your child or your family. And Proverbs gives that as a truth. Train up a child in the way that he should go. when he's old, he will not depart from it. I feel like, I'm repeat myself one more time, but I feel like it's always been focused on the old part. Like when he's old, he won't depart from it, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
But it's determined that what a child is going to be and how they're going to view you as a father is largely determined between ages 1 and 4. And as a nanny, as a child care professional, I'm sure you have some insight into that. But when we came to that point, was there anything that struck you, anything you took out of that could be directly applied into your life?
Yes, for sure. That I wrote that down too. I thought I didn't know that, so that was new information, and I almost I was like, really, you know, not that I would ever question.
Check me anytime.
I would never question. Yeah. However, I just was like, by the under 4, and so it got me thinking. Maybe not as much about my job, but again, back to my dad.
Yeah.
I was like, well, okay, let me put this to the test. Like, not that I can remember what I thought about my dad when I was 4, really. But okay. So like I said, my dad pastored till I was about 13. I mean, I'm 38 years old. So that was 25 years ago, right? He's not pastored for a long time. But my perception of my dad is still, when I think of the greatest memories that I have, the strongest memories that I have still, even after all these years in adulthood, are my dad, the man of God, my dad pastoring.
It's amazing.
Those are the strongest. I mean, I still think of him like that in a lot of ways. And that really made me think about that.
Yeah.
And so that was all formed, and it has stayed there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thankfully, they're good things, but I know that, for some children, the first 4 years, it may not be, so it's really important.
It's also, it's a little bit idealistic. Mm-hmm. There have been times where I've had to remember my dad's mortal. He needs grace.
Yeah.
And as a kid, and as a child, as a young adult, you idealize this man, but then you come to realize he's mortal, and you got to give him grace, and he's human, and you got to be merciful with him.
Yes, right.
And it's kind of like that thing we were talking about a minute ago. If you had a bad experience with your dad as a child, you've got to give God an opportunity to prove himself true.
Yeah.
Even as having a good experience with a dad or earthly father, you've got to give God an opportunity to prove himself merciful with that earthly father too.
Right.
Because there are times where they prove themselves mortal.
Yeah.
They prove themselves imperfect, flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true too. So, but if it's good, if it's right, when you're a child between you and your father, then those things can happen.
Right.
You can, because we learn to give grace
Yes.
from God.
You said, I don't know if I wrote this down, but it stuck with me too. You said you wanted to make sure to say you're not going to get it all right.
Yeah.
But if you can be conscious about this, to keep it in the back of your mind, you'll make more good decisions than bad.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring it up, but I'm glad you brought it up. And I mentioned when I made that point that Rahdona corrected me when I blew it one time with Rylan. I remember that. I'll never forget it. And she was right. I was wrong. I changed. I'm on public record here saying it. Kind of felt good to say it, actually. It's just a little bit of a relief.
Yes. Clear the air.
And that's when, as a dad, I began to learn, in particular, one of the greatest ways to teach your children forgiveness is to ask them to give it to you.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my good friends today posted on social media, this is his words, not mine. He disregarded the sentiments of his 2 sons saying Happy Father's Day yesterday. One, he was preparing to lead worship at his church. His son came up from behind him, embraced him, and said Happy Father's Day. And he brushed him off, said, yeah, thanks. And he went on because he was trying to focus on getting ready to lead worship. His second son comes that evening, interrupts him fixing a broken washing machine, and says, hey, Happy Father's Day. Love you. And he's like, son, I'm just trying to get this fixed right now. And he woke up this morning. He said, that's the first thing I thought about. It's the first thing I thought about. And when I read that text, and he had a picture of him and his boys, they're playing golf today. He got it right. He apologized to his son. He asked him to forgiveness. And I was reminded of this absolute truth that's been true in my life, the greatest way. And I almost commented on the post, and then I deleted it. I think, you know what? I'm on a podcast later. I'll just say it.
Yeah, there you go.
It is the greatest way. It is the greatest way to teach, as a father, your child forgiveness is to ask them for it. And I think I think that is where, as a child, maybe earlier on, they can realize dad's mortal.
Right.
Dad's human.
Right.
Dad's not perfect.
Yeah.
And he needs the grace of God, and I need to give it to him.
Right.
And Jesus said, if you're not gracious with others, if you're not merciful with others, you're not getting that from me.
Right.
You've got to extend that. And so the activity of God's mercy and grace in my children's life is contingent upon them learning how to give it. And how better for them to learn how to give it than for me to give them an opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Right.
It's amazing.